Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm ABC's Devin Dwyer in Washington, joined by our senior congressional reporter, Trish Turner. What are you called these days, Trish? It's great to have you here in the building. You're normally up running around on the Hill talking to sources, reporting out stories. I know you're going to bring some of that reporting very shortly. A lot happening on the Hill, so stay tuned for that. A breakthrough, perhaps, on the shutdown front. But we want to start with the crisis that's been unfolding in Virginia. It is really something, Trish. You've been a longtime resident of this town. You've watched Virginia politics. Have you ever seen anything like what we're seeing?
Never seen anything like it. Even when you catch up with longtime lawmakers in the state, they're shocked by what's going on. It seems like another day, another scandal, with the Democrats just left, wondering what the heck is the future for the party.
It is crazy. The governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, all embroiled in controversies of their own. And our Tom Yamas has been down in the state capital of Richmond today as the state continues to grapple with this crisis in political leadership. And Tom, you actually had a chance to catch up today with two of the figures at the center of this whole thing. We haven't heard very much from Justin Fairfax or from Graham Northam, but want to play the tape. You were in the halls there of the state capitol catching up with Justin Fairfax. Here it is.
Lieutenant Governor, how you doing? Tom Yamas from ABC News. Do you remember Dr. Tyson ever crying?
Look, it's good to see you.
Do you remember Dr. Tyson ever
crying? Good to see you guys. We're heading to session.
When was the last time Governor Northam? Have you spoken with Governor Northam?
Yes.
Is there any plan in place, Lieutenant Governor? Is there a plan in place?
The Lieutenant Governor very muted, Tom, in response to your questions about Dr. Tyson. That is, of course, his accuser who alleges a sexual assault happened in 2004. Walk us through that moment and and walk us through what your reaction was to some of his answers there.
Right. So, we really haven't heard from him outside of statements that he's released through his spokesperson or through his office. He's quickly ushered in here to the State House. He's quickly ushered out, and he hasn't really responded to questions. He did on Monday when these allegations first surfaced, but since Dr. Tyson came forward, he has been silent when it comes to interviews out in the public. So I decided to ask him, do you remember Dr. Tyson crying? Because she alleges that afternoon that she was sexually assaulted by the lieutenant governor back in 2004 at the DNC inside of a hotel room, that she started to cry afterwards. He remained silent, as you saw in that clip. He did not want to answer that. And then I asked him if he had spoken to Governor Northam, because they had not spoken in days. They hadn't spoken since Saturday when Governor Northam had that news conference that sort of set off all these scandals, revealing that he had appeared in blackface back in 1984. Now, Lieutenant Governor Fairfax says they did speak. A separate source told me the two men had a very cordial conversation. They wished each other well. And at one point, Devin, they even both said they were praying for each other. So that covers two of the scandals. Two other the scandals. The Attorney General, Mark Herring, admitting yesterday, of course, that he appeared in blackface as well in the 1980s, dressing as the rapper Curtis Blow. We got some video of him sort of running out of his office and into a waiting car last night, late at night. He left his office. This morning, he sort of ushered pretty quickly into his office as well. He hasn't released any statement at all. And then there's the majority leader now that we're dealing with. That was a new thing that broke today. A Virginia newspaper reporting that in 1968, the Virginia Military Institute yearbook, one of the managing editors of that yearbook, was the majority leader here in Virginia. And that majority leader, I got a chance to catch up with him. There are several racist photos inside of that yearbook. He's just released a statement saying, in part, that he is proud of being a graduate from Virginia Military Institute in 1968. He says he was the managing editor, part of a large staff, that he was not responsible for every single image, every single thing written in that yearbook. But he did say that he pledged in 1968 that he supported the integration of black cadets into the Virginia Military Institute back in 1968. He just released the statement. I tried to catch up with him earlier today, and when I pressed him on this, if he apologized, if he regrets any of the pictures in that yearbook, he had nothing to say, only to say that he was here to work on the budget. And I said, yeah, but you also have these racist photos from the yearbook. And then he walked into a room to caucus with some other Republicans at the time. So we're dealing with four different scandals, if you will, situations here at the Capitol in Richmond. And voters, regular Virginians we talk to here, they sort of want stability. They're embarrassed that this has happened in their state. And a lot of them actually are saying they want Governor Northam just to stay put. Devin, you can't have two consecutive terms for governor here in Virginia. So in a couple of years, he'll be termed out anyway, so someone else will run. But they just want some stability right now. And it's been so chaotic that everyone's just wondering what happens next.
Yeah, what happens next, and who steps into this turmoil to try to bring stability, try to sort of calm things, bring both sides together, bring the four people you just mentioned together? Do you have any sense of who that player might be in either Virginia politics or national politics to go to the state and try to sort of be a peacemaker, a broker, a calming influence?
I don't know if that person exists just quite yet. I can tell you this. Governor Northam, we know that he is not going to resign. A source told me that Lieutenant Governor Fairfax has no plans on resigning as well. But there is pressure from outside groups, and there are pressure now from the Democratic candidates running for president. A few of them who are saying they want Dr. Tyson's situation investigated. They want those allegations investigated. What exactly that means, I'm not sure. I mean, this happened back in 2004. I'm not sure if they're calling for a criminal investigation. I'm not sure if they're calling for an investigation within the Democratic Party here in Virginia. It may just be political speak, if you will. Nonetheless, it is putting a lot of pressure on some of the players here. And anybody who predicts they know what's going to happen, I mean, I wouldn't count on it, because every single day there's a different twist and turn.
Another surreal twist in this whole thing, on that very point, we've learned just in the past 24 hours, Trish, that the law firms that were involved in the Brett Kavanaugh fight in this town,
to me, because it's
I
like
mean,
it's like
are
echoes
representing
of the
the
Kavanaugh.
same players here.
It seems so almost tone deaf to think of the idea that someone would retain the firm that Justice Brett Kavanaugh had. The accuser, like you said, has she retained the firm that Christine Blasey Ford had, so it appears like we're fighting in this same circle again.
Well, this time on the Democratic side.
On the Democratic side. And like Tom says, I mean, these candidates for 2020 are in a really tough bind because, the women especially, I mean, they came out strongly in favor of Christine Blasey Ford very soon, so they were really, there's a lot of pressure for them to stand with this professor against.
And Tom, before we let you go, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but you've been down there now for several days, when the cameras are off and you're out in the coffee shops, you're back at the hotel. What are you hearing from people besides the turmoil? I mean, is there a sense of disgust? Is there a sense, a desperate sense, if you will, for political peace? I mean, what's sort of the pulse on things that you see?
I mean, for the most part, people here, at least in Richmond, where have been living their life. I mean, they're continuing on with their life. It is not a crisis that has consumed people. Is it embarrassing? That's what people tell us. Yeah, of course it's embarrassing. These are the highest elected leaders in their state. Here in the State House, what we see, I mean, physically what I see with my own eyes is there's a lot of frustration. People can't believe this. People are losing patience. You have a ton of reporters and cameras here that are in the State House trying to get this story. You have politicians who are trying to avoid the media. And under this umbrella of a sex scandal, allegations, and also a racist scandals as well. And it's just, just not a good look for Virginia at this point. And you guys were talking about the other candidates as well, bringing up some of the allegations and their words coming back to haunt them. I mean, it is so true, because one of the problems Democrats have here is that a lot of the Democrats in Virginia called on Governor Northam to resign, including the Attorney General. And now these allegations against Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, and sort of those voices are not as loud when it comes to Fairfax. They still say they're working together, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, but they have not come out as strongly. Again, these are allegations, of course, but it's a much different response than when it was Governor Northam, who's a fellow Democrat, I should mention. They wanted him out, and now everyone's sort of toned that talk down.
Hey, Tom, great to hear from you. Thanks for your reporting, and thanks for your time this afternoon. Much more from you coming up on World News Tonight as well. Trish, some other big news on this side of the river happening up on Capitol Hill, your bread and butter.
Makes me so happy.
Finally, a glimmer of hope, of compromise on Capitol Hill today.
We may not have to talk about the shutdown again.
We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we do know that the clock is ticking. 9 days from now, government funding runs out again. We do know that there's a risk of another shutdown. They've been at odds over President Trump's border wall, but you're hearing that there may actually be a breakthrough.
Yes. So this has been coming. We started the ball rolling yesterday. We were gradually hearing like the Republicans and the Democrats in this, they wanted to be left alone. That means keep the president out of the talks, keep Pelosi out of the talks, and just see if they could come to a deal. And lo and behold, last night, after they had a briefing with border security professionals, they were all sort of getting, sort of schooled up on their facts and where they could come to a deal. And imagine this, it seems to come down to almost semantics. So President Trump has been insisting on a border wall, but if he backs off on that, everyone seems to be coming around the idea, even Democrats are, that they could add border fencing to,
Even Nancy Pelosi.
Even Nancy Pelosi
Okay.
is not, she's not firmly wrapped her arms around the idea, but at least she is saying, look, you can come to a bipartisan deal, I will bring it up for a vote. She's not necessarily saying she'll support it, but that's pretty pivotal, and she's not standing in the way.
Just a little while ago, we did hear from one of the top Republican senators on that negotiating team, Richard Shelby, who came and spoke to cameras. Here's how he characterized where things are at right now and whether President Trump ultimately might support this agreement.
I don't know if he'd sign whatever we came up with, but I had a very positive conversation with the president and the vice president earlier today, and I believe he was very reasonable with us. He stated explicitly he wants us to, on the appropriation level, to conclude this, to fund the government. Does he want some things funded? Absolutely. You know, that's natural, so do I. But I think that we're on a positive trajectory course now. The next 72 hours probably are very important on the staff level because I see some sunshine.
You see some sunshine,
See
so
some
do we.
sunshine.
It's a welcome, refreshing change of tone on Capitol Hill. Let's hope they can keep it going.
That's enthusiasm from Dick Shelby, in case no one recognizes that.
Yes, he's normally very flatlined, so that was good.
So that's him meeting with the president and vice president. Senator Graham, a top ally of Trump, he's on his way to the White House right now, too, to tell the president, he told us, that he's going to tell the president, accept the deal. You're not going to get everything you wanted because we think they're coming down off that $5.7 billion number. But look, it's a good deal. It doesn't mean you can't still do the national emergency, but take the deal when if you can.
We'll see what happens there. Meanwhile, Democrats in their newfound majority in the House of Representatives are beginning to talk about climate change. Yesterday, they had their first congressional hearing on climate change in who knows when, maybe the first climate change hearing ever. And today, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, the liberal firebrand, and freshman Congresswoman from New York, Ed Markey, Senator of Massachusetts, unveiled this concept of a Green New Deal. It's the thing everybody, liberals are talking about, Republicans taking pot shots at it. But here you see AOC and Ed Markey talking about the Green New Deal. Here is a look at what it is. So many people have heard about it. What's in it? Well, they unveiled it today. I think we have a graphic. It's a pretty bold proposal. What they put on the table is a goal for the United States to emit zero greenhouse gas emissions one day. They've talked about 10 years of mobilizing projects to get there, including repairing and upgrading infrastructure, expanding renewable power sources. They're calling for upgrading, retrofitting every single physical structure, every building in the United States for energy efficiency. They've also talked about overhauling the transportation system for low emissions. And let me take a breath and clean up waste sites, restore ecosystems. Hugely ambitious, Trish.
Clearly an ambitious, project here. It's a non-binding resolution.
It's
so this
a resolution.
Is a toe
this
in the
is
water.
not a piece of legislation.
Right. So, but this is a big statement, and that tells you how far they have to come. I mean, they have to go. Because if it's just a resolution that won't even have the force of law, Speaker Pelosi is not committing to bringing this to the floor. She knows what a politically toxic topic this can be. Pardon the pun. But she remembers years back when she signed on to cap and trade with President Bush. It stung the Democrats. It absolutely it flipped her into the minority eventually is one of the reasons. And she also knows that this election, she just won the majority on the backs not of liberal firebrands like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but of the suburban moderate Republicans. So she has to be ever conscious of that.
Yeah.
And so she can't go storming onto the floor with a Green New Deal that some say, it is ambitious.
Right. But I think our latest polling found only a third of Americans actually think climate change is an imminent threat.
Exactly.
So they're trying to thread the needle of raising consciousness, raising awareness, and also trying to advance their goal. Let's bring in now a couple of guests who are experts in this subject, much more than I am. Michael Mann, he's a distinguished professor of atmospheric science at Penn State University. He's also the co-author of a new book, The Madhouse Effect, How Climate Change Denial is Threatening Our Planet, Destroying Our Politics, and Driving Us Crazy. Professor, it's great to see you. I wanted to start by getting your reaction to the Green New Deal. It's a big vision, big, bold ideas for the moment, I guess.
Thanks. Yes. Well, it's an audacious plan, but we need some audacity. What we are talking about here is the greatest threat that we face as a civilization. Climate change, as you mentioned, if you just poll the American people and you ask them, how much do you care about climate change? It might not rank up there in the top 5 issues, but it turns out that all of the things that do turn up in the top 5 concerns when it comes to national security, our economy, our health, all of those things are impacted by climate change. And I think that Americans are beginning to connect the dots. They're realizing that what climate change really is unprecedented heat waves and wildfires and superstorms that are having a very damaging impact on us now. And the cost of inaction, of not doing something about the problem, is already far greater than the cost of taking action. And what this proposal does is to try to ensure that we do take the actions necessary to avert catastrophic additional warming of the planet.
And Professor, I want to kind of drill down on that. We've been over this turf before here in the briefing room, but I'm from Minnesota, was just home recently, and even sort of middle of the country folks who accept that climate change perhaps is a thing say, gosh, but it is so brutally cold this winter. They listen to the president say, so what, where's climate change? Where's global warming? It's so cold outside. Help educate us, and there was a new UN report just out yesterday saying this actually technically was the 4th warmest year on record, 2018. How do you intellectually combat that from what people feel in the moment, a very, very cold stretch here in the Northeast, for example, with the bigger picture, climate science picture of a 1 degree increase in a year?
Yeah, so let's sort through the sort of the information here and sort it out from the misinformation and disinformation. When Donald Trump tweets something, there's a good chance that it's wrong. And in this case, it's absolutely wrong. We didn't see record cold. We saw old-fashioned cold. And by old-fashioned cold, what I mean is the sort of cold and conditions that we were used to in the 1970s, but the planet has warmed so much and the United States has warmed enough that those sorts of winters that we remember, those of us who are old enough to remember them in the early 1970s, have become infrequent enough that what would qualify simply as average cold in the long term, people think is somehow unprecedented. We didn't see record cold, but what we have seen over the past several years is a huge increase in record heat. Unprecedented heat waves and wildfires in the West and flooding in the eastern U.S. that are all symptomatic of the impact of that 1 degree Celsius, 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit warming of the planet. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's enough to lead to a far greater incidence of these extreme weather events. And even that sort of breakdown in the polar vortex that was giving us those cold conditions in the Midwest and here in the East about a week ago. And it wasn't record cold. It was just, 1970s sorts of cold. There's some evidence now that the warming of the planet, and in particular the fact that the Arctic is warming so much more than the rest of the planet, that's changing the jet stream. It's slowing down the jet stream, slowing down the polar vortex, which allows some of these cold Arctic air masses to actually break out of the Arctic and drift down into the United States. And so the fact that we're seeing these cold Arctic outbreaks may actually be symptomatic of the human impact on our climate.
Yeah, and that impact is something that a lot of politicians on Capitol Hill now want to take on. I want to bring in one of those now, our other guest, Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon, who was just named to the Select Committee on Climate Change. Congresswoman, great to see you today. Thanks for coming in. I want to get your reaction to the Green New Deal and whether you think that it's a good blueprint, a good starting point for whatever your committee is going to undertake in terms of legislation to take on some of the challenges that Professor Mann was just talking about.
Sure, and thank you so much for the opportunity. It was an honor to be selected to serve on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. Climate change is something that I hear about from my constituents in Oregon. We're hearing about from people across the country, and that could be in terms of extreme weather events, the changing conditions in our oceans, the snowpack that we don't have for our outdoor recreation industries. We're hearing so many concerns across the country, and I'm glad that the Green New Deal resolution was introduced, because that is a bold blueprint for the future to change our system of energy here in the United States so that we can reduce carbon emissions and make a difference. Now, the Select Committee on Climate Crisis is going to be getting ideas from across the country, led by Congresswoman Kathy Castor from Florida. The members will be working with the committees, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The committees will be writing the legislation, but we will be gathering ideas, as I said, from around the country. What works? How can we get to this point where we are reducing carbon emissions? Because we absolutely need to take bold action. This is something that is important for our future.
And what do you make of the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, there's been some talk today, she's sort of been the biggest proponent of the Green New Deal. She was out there today pushing it. She was offered a slot on the committee. Right. She declined it. What do you make of that? And does not having her star power as part of your effort make it a little more complicated? Or what do you make of her non-participation?
Well, certainly that question should be addressed to Representative Ocasio-Cortez. I'm impressed with the experience of the members on the committee. I've served on the Science Committee here in Congress since I joined Congress 7 years ago, but we also have a lot of people with great backgrounds in renewable energy, people who care a lot about this issue and are going to work hard to gather these ideas, to talk about how we can work with the committees as they craft legislation, whether it be the wave energy research that we're doing in Oregon off the Oregon coast, looking at how we can increase the use of solar, wind, wave energy, how we can increase battery technology, and of course the efficiencies that we've talked about, because the more we can make our buildings and our transportation infrastructure more efficient, that all makes a difference. So the Select Committee will be getting all those ideas and identifying places where the policy can make a difference. And I truly hope this is bipartisan, because people across the country, it doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans or non-affiliated or independent. They want clean air. They want clean water. They want to make sure that the jobs are good paying jobs, and we can do that because a lot of this is infrastructure and making sure that people have the skills they need to work in clean energy jobs.
And I want to bring Michael Mann, Professor Mann, back into this quickly before we go. Professor, looking at the Green New Deal and listening to some of the things the Congresswoman is talking about as she's soliciting ideas, do you see a place for nuclear power, hydropower in sort of a Green New Deal plan, whatever that ends up being?
Well, I think there's a worthy debate to be had about the role that nuclear energy might play in our efforts to decarbonize our economy. That's the sort of debate that we ought to be having in Congress. And unfortunately, over the past several years, the debate that we were having is climate change real? Is it a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese? I testified a couple of years ago to the House Science Committee that was led at the time by Lamar Smith of Texas, who is a climate change denier. And the whole purpose of this hearing was to cast doubt on the global consensus of the world's scientists that climate change is real and human-caused and already a threat. Hopefully now we can get past that fake debate and on to the worthy debate about what we do to solve the problem. And the Green New Deal proposal, that's an important step in having that conversation and opening up that debate.
Great to have you, Professor Michael Mann, Penn State University. Thank you so much, sir. Also great to have Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon, newly appointed to the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. Thank you both very, very much for coming in the briefing room. Appreciate your time. Moving on now to the race for 2020, obviously getting a little more wild. Trish, we've got many more candidates getting in the race. We're still expecting a few more to get in. And our Brad Mielke caught up with one of the candidates who was the first to get into the race, former Maryland Congressman who you know well, John Delaney.
He's been in for almost 2 years.
2 years running for president.
Believe it or not.
You may not know the guy. He's been out in Iowa. In fact, he has more offices in Iowa than any other Democratic candidate, and he's been to all 99 Iowa counties.
Only he and Chuck Grassley,
Only he
I think,
and Chuck Grassley. And here's a little bit of Brad Mielke's conversation with John Delaney just a few days ago.
Thanks for being here, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so, wait, how long have you been running for president?
A year.
How did that happen? Everyone's just getting in now. You've been in the game forever.
Well, I think a head start actually helps. I mean, but seriously, I think I'm the right person for the job and I have the right vision for the country. But not enough people knew who I was. And the way for me to solve that problem is to just jump in the pool first and start swimming.
Well, so who are you? What do you tell people when they ask?
So I tell them about my background, which is why we're here. Grew up right up the street there in a little town called Woodridge, New Jersey. Grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was an electrician. This diner we used to come to all the time when I was a kid. My dad came to this diner since he was in high school. So I grew up in a kind of a hard-working, blue-collar family. And so what I think this country needs more than anything is a president who will return a sense of common purpose to the American people, which doesn't mean we agree with each other on everything, but so that we could start working on some of the big things we have to do, solve some of the problems that are really facing the American people, get some things done, and build a better future together. The reason I want to be president, because I think, as I said, the most important issue facing this country is how do we take this terribly divided nation and start bringing it back together. Because if we don't do that, we're going to look at a future where more and more people are going to be left behind, where these big challenges we have to confront, whether it be climate change or a long-term fiscal condition or the effect that technology is having on every aspect of our life, whether it be work, our society, our security risks, our privacy, where we don't confront those things, and where every political disagreement is almost met by violent protests fueled by disinformation wars. That's the future we're headed towards. But I think there's a totally better future available to us. But it starts with us acknowledging that we're all in this together and that we actually have to work together to achieve something better. So I'm running for president to be the person to do that and to change politics and hopefully change policy and hopefully build a better future.
And our thanks to Brad Mielke and Congressman Delaney for that. And joining us now, political reporter Molly Nagel, who is tracking another Democrat who's not in the race, but the one everybody's talking about, former Vice President Joe Biden. Molly, you have been on the case, in fact, reaching out to sources. What's going on with Joe Biden? What are we hearing? What are you hearing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I've spoken to a couple sources. His campaign is staying very tight-lipped on this. One source close to the campaign.
You just spoke with today.
I just spoke with today. It said his top lieutenants are calling around looking for a path forward to the nomination. I also spoke to James Smith. He ran for governor in South Carolina. Okay. He was a Democratic candidate there. He's very close to Biden. Biden feels a kinship with him. He reminds him a lot of his son, Beau. He has not been in touch with Biden. They're working to get a time for the two of them to get together. But he spoke with a mutual friend who said to him, it's not if Biden announces, it's when he announces.
Not if, but when.
As much as we want to read the tea leaves here, though, I think it ultimately comes down to what Biden wants. Yeah. He's been through this twice before. He knows what it's like to run a campaign. He knows how difficult it can be. And he said on multiple occasions, he feels that your heart and soul really have to be in the race. So he knows what it takes to run. He said publicly he thinks he's the most qualified to do so. So no surprises there.
So all the tea leaves are coming together. You're hearing from sources it's not if, but when. Trish, you've heard from sources the same thing.
Someone close to him in the Senate said he's done everything he can do to lay a perfect run. Now it's just he's got to flip the switch.
He's getting really close. He's out there. Just take a look at this picture on Twitter we saw from one of Kamala Harris's aides. Look at this. Joe Biden working the Amtrak line, shaking hands, and one presidential candidate running into another potential candidate. So we will see what's in store. Molly Nagel, thanks so much for that reporting. We know you'll stay on the Biden beat. Trish Turner, great to have you here in the briefing room as always. Fantastic reporting. And great to have you watching us today here in the briefing room. We'll be back tomorrow for the Friday edition of the briefing room, 3:30 Eastern time. Until then, I'm Devin Dwyer. We'll see you then.